The drive home was the longest 40 minutes of Karen's life. She'd been escorted off campground property after what the officer diplomatically called a misunderstanding, though Karen distinctly remembered the phrase harassment being mentioned. Worse, someone had filmed her confrontation with the camp manager, and the video was already making rounds on social media with the hashtag Treehouse Karen. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed clusters of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, their phones conspicuously absent for once. The usual admiring glances at her perfectly manicured lawn were replaced by barely concealed smirks and whispered conversations that stopped when she appeared. Gary met her at the front door, his face grim. "Karen, we need to talk." "Not now, Gary. I need to call my lawyer and—" "Your lawyer already called." His voice was flat. "Apparently, the Hendersons' attorney contacted him about your activities today. Something about harassment and abuse of HOA power." Karen sank into her designer kitchen chair, the weight of the day finally hitting her. "They can't do this to me. I was protecting our property values, our community standards. Were you?" Gary sat across from her, his expression more serious than she'd seen in years. "Or were you so obsessed with being right that you forgot these are our neighbors? That their kids play with the other children in the neighborhood? The rules exist for a reason, Gary. The rules exist to maintain a pleasant community, not to wage war on families building memories with their children." Karen stared at her reflection in the black granite countertop. When had she become this person? When had protecting property values become more important than actual people? She thought back to her own childhood, to the elaborate backyard fort her father had built, to the hours of imaginative play that had shaped her into someone who valued precision and order, but also someone who had once understood magic. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another social media post about her treehouse crusade had gone viral. Comments poured in, some supportive of property rights, but most mocking her obsession with controlling her neighbors' every move. For the first time in her career as HOA president, Karen Whitmore felt genuinely embarrassed. 3 days later, the Hendersons returned from their camping trip. Karen watched from her window as they maneuvered the treehouse back into their yard, their children chattering excitedly about their adventure. The structure looked exactly the same, but somehow Karen saw it differently now, less as a violation of regulations and more as a symbol of family joy. She found herself walking across the street before she could talk herself out of it. Mrs. Henderson was watering her garden when Karen approached, and the woman's face immediately tensed. "I owe you an apology," Karen began, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "My behavior was unacceptable." Mrs. Henderson set down her watering can, studying Karen with cautious eyes. "Thank you for saying that. I'd like to withdraw the HOA complaint against your treehouse," Karen continued, "and perhaps we could discuss modifications that would bring it into compliance without removing its character." For the first time in weeks, Mrs. Henderson smiled. "I think we'd like that." As Karen walked back to her house, she noticed the treehouse's fairy lights twinkling in the afternoon sun. She still believed in rules and order, but maybe, just maybe, there was room for a little magic too. But late that night, as she revised HOA regulations on her laptop, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the Hendersons were planning something. Their victory had been too easy, their forgiveness too quick. Through her window, she could see lights moving around in the treehouse, and the sound of construction echoed across the quiet neighborhood. Whatever they were building now, Karen had a sinking feeling it was going to be much bigger than a simple treehouse. Karen Whitmore stood in her pristine front yard, phone pressed to her ear, watching in absolute horror as what she claimed as community property rolled down Maple Street like a fairy tale cottage on wheels. The elaborate treehouse, complete with wraparound porch, stained glass windows, and what appeared to be a working chimney, bounced gently on industrial tires as it disappeared around the corner. 911. "Yes, I need to report a theft," she shrieked into her phone, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair whipping in the morning breeze. "Someone is stealing our neighborhood treehouse." The dispatcher's confused voice crackled through. "Ma'am, did you say treehouse?" Karen's face flushed crimson. 3 weeks ago, she'd discovered the magnificent structure in the Hendersons' backyard, and immediately declared it a neighborhood eyesore that violated 17 different HOA regulations. She'd spent days crafting legal documents, organizing emergency board meetings, and rallying neighbors to her cause. The treehouse was too tall, too colorful, too whimsical for their upscale subdivision. But yesterday, she'd had her masterstroke. During her morning patrol, she'd noticed something extraordinary. The treehouse wasn't actually attached to the ground. It sat on a wheeled platform, technically making it a vehicle. And vehicles, according to county law, couldn't be permanently parked on residential property for more than 48 hours without proper registration. She'd immediately filed paperwork claiming the abandoned structure for the HOA, planning to have it removed and donated to the city park. The victory had been sweet until this morning, when she'd arrived to oversee its removal only to watch it literally drive away. "Karen, you need to calm down," her husband Gary called from their front porch, clearly embarrassed by the spectacle she was creating. Neighbors had begun emerging from their houses, phones out, recording her meltdown. "Calm down, calm down." Karen spun around, her manicured finger pointing accusingly at the empty space where the treehouse had been. "That structure belongs to the community now. I have the paperwork. It's legal." Mrs. Chen from next door cleared her throat. "Actually, Karen, I saw the Hendersons loading it up at sunrise. The dad was hooking it to their truck. Looked like they were taking their kids camping." "Camping?" Karen's voice reached a pitch that made several dogs start barking. "You can't just drive away with community property. This is theft. This is. She paused, a calculating look crossing her face. The Hendersons had outmaneuvered her, but Karen Whitmore hadn't become the most feared HOA president in the county by giving up easily. If they thought they could embarrass her in front of the entire neighborhood and get away with it, they had another thing coming. She smiled coldly, already formulating her next move. The Hendersons might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. 3 hours later, Karen sat in her pristine white SUV, staring at her laptop screen filled with camping ground websites. She'd called every RV park within a 50-mile radius, describing the stolen property with the fervor of a detective hunting a serial killer. "Yes, it's a treehouse on wheels," she explained to the bewildered camp host at Pine Ridge Campground. "Brown exterior, stained glass windows, looks like something out of a children's book. The thieves are probably traveling with 2 small children." Gary had stopped trying to reason with her after she'd printed out missing pro-PRT flyers featuring photos she'd secretly taken of the treehouse during her surveillance missions. She'd plastered them on community bulletin boards, posted them in local Facebook groups, and even considered hiring a private investigator. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "Found them. Hidden Valley Campground, Site 23. My cousin works there." Karen's heart raced as she speed-dialed the campground. "This is Karen Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook HOA," she announced in her most authoritative voice. "I need to speak with your manager immediately about stolen property on your premises." 20 minutes later, she was racing down the highway, her emergency flashes blinking as she exceeded the speed limit for what she considered official HOA business. In her mind, she was a crusader for property rights and neighborhood values. The fact that she was chasing a family on their vacation never crossed her radar. Hidden Valley Campground was tucked between rolling hills, filled with RVs, tents, and the sounds of children playing. Karen spotted the treehouse immediately. It looked even more magical surrounded by tall pines, with fairy lights twinkling from its windows, and the Henderson children's laughter echoing from within. She marched to the camp office, her heels clicking ominously on the wooden steps. "I'm here about the illegal structure in Site 23, she announced to the startled young woman behind the counter. "Ma'am, all our guests are registered and—" "That treehouse is stolen property," Karen interrupted, slamming her folder of documents on the counter. "I have legal claim to that structure, and I demand you evict them immediately." The camp manager, a weathered man named Bob, emerged from the back office. He studied Karen's paperwork with growing amusement. "So let me get this straight. You filed a claim on their treehouse because it was on wheels, but now you're upset that they used the wheels." They can't just drive away with community property. But it wasn't community property until you claimed it was abandoned, Bob pointed out with infuriating logic. And it wasn't abandoned. They were just storing it in their backyard. Karen felt her carefully constructed legal argument crumbling. I demand you call the police. Bob shrugged and picked up his phone. While he spoke quietly to the dispatcher, Karen paced the small office, her mind spinning. She could see the treehouse through the window, could hear the Henderson family laughing around their campfire. The sight filled her with a rage she couldn't quite understand. When the police officer arrived, a young woman who looked thoroughly tired of dealing with camping disputes, Karen launched into her prepared speech about property law and HOA authority. But as she spoke, she noticed the officer's expression growing more skeptical. "Ma'am," the officer finally interrupted, "this sounds like a civil matter. The Hendersons have registration for their treehouse trailer, they paid for their campsite, and your paperwork only applies to property within your HOA boundaries." Karen's mouth fell open. She hadn't considered jurisdiction, her power, her authority, her carefully crafted legal victory. None of it mattered here in the woods.